Okay, so good morning everybody. So this is my first lecture here, my fourth FEFU lecture on mechanics of materials. And today we will look at the multi-axial yield criteria. So you know, during the first three sessions, we have studied the so-called rheology, that means the way the strain, the deformation, will change according to time and the applied stresses. This has been made in one-dimensional condition, or one-dimensional loading, but in order to, so engineers need something else. So engineers, for the computation, they need a true 3D constitutive equation, three-dimensional constitutive equation. In order to build this three-dimensional model, this is what we will make later in this course, we need another ingredient, and this ingredient, this is a criteria. That means the boundary in the stress space that limit the elastic behavior. Okay? Please. So before starting the course itself, I would like to recall that all the material of this course is available here. Is available on the website, and the name of the website is mms2.insmp.fr. So on this site, some courses are in French, sorry for that, but at least this course, Place Paris here, we will find it here. This course is in English. So you come here in module, and you go to Place Paris here, and this will provide you some material of the corresponding to the course. So we have already made this introduction section here and this rheology section here, and now we will move to the criterion section. Okay. So for each case, each of these chapters in the course, so you will find a handout. That means you will find a description of the course and what the beauty of this thing is that it will be in Russian eventually, since you may have also a book on mechanics of material that is in Russian. It is a Russian translation of a book we have also in French and in English. So this you can find something here in the handout. You will find here the slides. That means the slides I will show today. You can download them, the slides here. You have also exercise with a full solution of the exercise. And this is a quiz. That means after the course, if you have understood, you should be able to go there and to answer all these questions. Okay, the question of criteria here, and you have a list of questions. Depending, so we will see what is von Mises criterion, for instance, and you will click here, and at the end you will see what is your mark. Since after OK here, you can have a view concerning the good response and the bad response. So I got 2 out of 12, which is bad. So that means I need to review these things on criteria today. Okay, so let's start now with the course itself, and so we will have the content of the course of the lecture will be first some information concerning the experimental data, and the experimental data we have, they are first mechanical tests and then a view towards the deformation mechanisms. On the other hand, we'll see that we have 2 types of plasticity criteria. One is the class of models that are pressure independent. They are not sensitive to the hydrostatic pressure. That will be the first chapter of our lesson here. And the second one will be the criteria that depends on the pressure. Okay. So these experimental data, so they are in the labs, of course, but they are also in real life. And here we have a series of examples where obviously the loading is not one-dimensional here. So this is a small tank for a rocket for meteorologists, And all of you know that when you have a pressure inside the tank, you will have at least a two-dimensional loading state of stress. That means stresses in this direction, axial direction, and also a very important hook stress, orthoradial stress. This is another pressure vessel, and this corresponds to a nuclear power plant. And so hopefully it's not a real life, it's just a test. And you have an explosion here due to the internal pressure made of due to water inside, just to test the strength of the material. So this is an example of biaxial loading path, biaxial loading state. We have also shear. So shear is also an important loading state, and this is a shear that has been applied on a small steel component that was a connection between two other components, and that he has failed in pure shear. This one is totally another scale. Okay, this is the Earth, and when you look at this picture here is an example of the study of the big Sumatra earthquake some years ago, and describing the way the crust will move on the mantle. Okay, and in this process you have also high shear deformation and high shear stresses that come into play. Okay, so now this is real world with a complex stress state, and this is what we have done up to now. So we started with this simple curve, and what we know is the way the stress will change here according to the strain, with this elastic regime here, and then the nonlinear regime. This is a picture I've taken from a previous lecture. Okay. So, but in fact, having this result in hand, what we must deal with is such a type of loading of senior. This is the way in a component, in an automotive component, during a test, and you have time here in seconds, and you have the stresses, but you have 6 components of your stress tensor that are here, and that are you cannot neglect all of them. So you may have a stress state like this one in NPA, and now you have to ask the question. So if I have such a kind of stress tensor, of stress state, does it correspond to elasticity or not? So to do that, to know that, and I have to use a multi-action criteria. Okay. So how can we characterize that from the lab now? So of course, so instead of having just one-dimensional test, I must go for multi-axial tests, and I will provide you with a few examples to show how people make multi-axial, very simple multi-axial tests on the material. And then, in order to characterize the criteria we will develop, another good idea is to have a look at the mechanisms. Since the equation we will write on the macroscopic scale, of course, they depend on the mechanism, on the lower scale that will produce plasticity or viscoplasticity. So let's start with this multi-axial test. So this is the most common test in the lab, and you take a specimen. This is for metallic alloy. Take a specimen like this one. What you can see is that it's a cylinder, of course, and this is the interesting part of the specimen, since this is the weakest part of the specimen, and the specificity of this specimen. Maybe you can see here. You can see that here is that it's a hollow specimen, and with a thin wall. So in that case, in such a specimen, this is the length of the specimen. This is the angle of a torsion we'll apply, Then you will characterize the angle like this one, and depending on the angle, you will be able to characterize the strain here, and the strain will have a component theta z in terms of cylindric component. Okay? And if you apply a tension, you will have epsilon zz. That means you may characterize with this type of approach, you may have an access to two independent components of the stress tensor and two independent components of the strain tensor also, since you can see here, maybe you have too much light here, but so you may have strain gauges on that passed on the cylinder, and that means that you may have also an experimental information concerning the local strain. So having in hand the local strain and the local stresses, so you can have a view toward a multi-axial effect of the plasticity. So another example, which is very classical also, is a biaxial test. Biaxial, that means you will apply, instead of having a tension and shear, you will have two tension. Okay? This is a cruciform specimen. Maybe you can see here the specimen here. It's a sort of big cross, and you will have at least two, and sometimes four independent actuators, and so you will apply a tension like that on your specimen. So what you can do in that case is to have two independent axial components and test the material in this condition. So this is an example for a composite. So since composite sheets, they often have to be used in the biaxial condition. Like for instance, in the first tank I showed you, the tank for the rocket, it was an example where the material operates in biaxial condition. So each time, so when you will have downloaded this PDF here, you can also look at this. When you have something in blue like that, that means it is a link. And if you follow this link here, you will go to a website and you will have more information concerning this test. Okay? I don't do that here since we don't have time to do that. But please do that when you are at home. So another example coming from our lab is two examples. In fact, these are examples where you apply shear, pure shear on your specimen. This one is for rubber, and what you can see here is that you have aluminium sheet here, another one here, another one in the middle here, and here you have it's called a double shear. That means you test two rubber specimens in the same time. Okay, the rubber is in black here. You know that it's a parallelogram. And here, you apply a tension in these two here, and you apply a tension here. And so you will have a double shear on your specimen. Another solution to apply shear and to apply in the same time shear and tension is to take a so-called Arcan specimen. So that means you have these two material plate like that. So these are the plate that will connect the specimen to the machine, and the specimen itself is here. Okay, so in this condition here, the specimen is just a small rectangle here, a parallelepiped in fact, and you will apply like that. You will apply a pure tension on this specimen. But if you rotate here, this system, the grip system here, you will have the specimen will be no longer horizontal, but he will have a certain angle. And when you will shear, when you will apply a tension, you will have in the same time shear and tension on your specimen. Okay, so doing that, you may also have an access to multi-axial loading. So we made a review for metallic materials, for composites, and here for rubber. So of course, I know that some of you are also interested by soils and rocks. So this is the way people do some pressure and shear tests on sands. Okay, so this is a complex machine, and in fact the specimen is just here in a small box, okay? And this small box, you have a big system here, and you have two actuators in this machine. This is an actuator here that will provide compression, and this one will provide tension or compression. So when you have to load your system here, you load your box with the sand, then you take the system, all the system should be in the frame here, okay? You will apply a compression on the box, and then you will try to move it, okay? And what can be easily understood, I guess, is that if the pressure is low, it will be easy to shear the box, okay? But if you increase the pressure now, it's like if you have a series of paper sheets, for instance, if you increase the pressure, it will be more and more difficult to have shear, okay? So, in fact, what we are considering here, this is the first case where we may have an influence of the pressure on the plastic yield. Okay? For all the other cases, what we will see is that in this case, we will have a plastic deformation, and it will not depend on the pressure. For the sand, this is our first example where we will have the influence of the pressure. Okay, so before coming to the model, so we have seen the setups that are needed. We'll have a brief look at the experimental results. Okay, so we started with this torsion specimen here, and applying tension and shear on the material. We will see what is the result. Okay, and I have here a result coming from École Normale Supérieure in Cachan by Rousset. It's an old thesis, 30 years ago maybe, but the results are still valid, I guess. And this is sigma 1,1 here, what is the axial stress, and sigma 1,2, that is the shear stress. Okay? And what you can see on this diagram here, on this picture, this is the shape of the initial yield, which is an elliptic shape. Okay? So how did he obtain this result? So he started with his hollow tube, and he applied a tension. If you apply a tension, that means that the stress, the only non-zero stress component is sigma 1,1. So you will start from 0 here, and then you will increase the load, and then when you increase the load, you also take a record of the displacement, of the displacement and angle. Okay, and then after a certain yield, you can check that the signal becomes nonlinear with respect to the input, to the stresses. So you will stop your machine in that case, and you go down. Okay, and then you go to compression to make the same thing. And when it's nonlinear, you stop again. Okay. Then you go back here, and then you apply both two signals, both tension and rotation. Okay, proportionally. That means you will follow a line like this one, and you will stop here. Okay, etc. And now you will build a full, the full experimental yield, the boundary of your elastic domain. The beauty of this test is that then in this thesis the purpose was not to look only at the initial yield, but also at the deformation of this yield locus due to strain and due to stresses. So that means this one here, this new, it's no longer an ellipse. It's flat here, and you have a corner here. This is what you have, what you can obtain after tension. That means you take the specimen, you apply a tension to the specimen, then you unload, and again you make this search for the yield, the new yield. And so this provides you an information concerning hardening. Okay, you remember when we have in this rheology section. So we have studied the initial the initial load that provides plasticity, nonlinear behavior, but also we know that there is a life for the material after this threshold, and so this is what happens during hardening. This is the thing that has to be represented by model for hardening. So I don't give too much detail for that, since today we will restrict to the initial yield. And this is a result we can obtain with sand. When we have sand, this is a diagram, so it's written, it's maybe too small for you. You have shear displacement here, and this is a shear load. Okay, so this is the response in terms of shear, and you have two curves. This one is obtained when you have a very small pressure, here, and this one is obtained when you have a larger pressure. Okay, so you can see that, you can observe that when you have a larger pressure, the yield will be also larger. That means for sand, we have to build a model that will be pressure dependent. Okay, so that's all for the mechanical effect, and now we'll briefly have a look at the mechanisms. Okay, and if we have in mind what will be the deformation mechanism of our material, first we will have a first class of material like alloys and rocks that will deform by shear. We will see that later. And we will have also the powder or geomaterials like sand that will have another type of behavior. So this is the way you will deform a material. So you have a crystalline material. You have a crystal network like that, and the deformation process is due to the shear displacement of a given part of the network with respect to the other one. Okay? You can check that when you have done such a transformation, the volume of the material is the same. Okay? This is no longer the case when you have a powder like that. If you want to shear your powder, you can easily imagine that you have all these small grains that they will rotate, and they will have to go to pass over the other one, and in such a process that we have observed, that is observed classically, is that the volume will increase. Okay, so generally speaking, the volume increase when you apply a shear to sand. Okay, so what is a critical variable in that case? In the first case, so we'll have a shear, and that is a critical variable, and we will introduce deviator in the models. And for the other case, we will introduce deviator and also the spherical parts of the stress. Okay, so let's go for an example of shear in the material. This is a very pure example, since the specimen here, the full specimen, is just a single crystal, because that means you have the same network, the same metallic network in the whole specimen. And we apply here, that is French theory, but it's just a little bit of loading of the cycle. We apply a small tension, and what you can see of the specimen, the specimen was polished before starting the test. What you can see here is a line. Okay? And when you, after 2 cycles, you have several lines like that, they are parallel. And after 11 cycles, you have a lot of lines like that. So this is an experimental evidence of what is called a slip plane. Okay, that means that in this material here, you have a crystal network, and it's a 3-dimensional view of what I've shown here. Okay? When you have a shear like this one, the shear is applied in a given plane, which is called slip plane, and in a given direction, which is a slip direction. Okay? And this mechanism is fully characterized by the geometry of your material. Okay? So this is pure shear, you have no volume change. This is another example. Now this is a polycrystal, and the polycrystal has been polished also before starting the test. And after the test, you can check that you have this. Since this is a polycrystal, you have a lot of grains like that, and the dimension here is very small. Okay, 20 micrometers. Here that means the grains make something like 50 micrometers, and you have slip lines inside. That means that each of these grains will deform by slip. Okay? So this is an example, a more macroscopic example of a specimen that will fail under dynamic loading, dynamic compression. So you can see that I already have a little damage here, and when I will make the test, so in fact the test is made in 1.01 seconds, something like that. So what you can see here is that you also has some big shear plates that comes here, and the mechanism is nothing but on this macroscopic scale is again shear. Since maybe you have this thing in mind, that means when you apply a compression like that, you have a maximum shear at 45 degrees. So we will review that in a while. But this line at 45 degrees, that demonstrates that you have also a shear deformation of your material. So let's characterize our mechanism on a local scale, the mechanism of slip on slip plates. Okay, so this is, maybe I should define a little bit better my sometimes it works, sometimes not. Wake up, listen. Ah, it's okay. See here. So what we will consider is a normal N here. This is characterizing the plane. Here. And we will have a slip direction here, which is L. So this is for a system S, and we will have a slip direction LS. Okay? So in this condition, when you apply a stress tensor, if you compute the product sigma times ns, what you will get will be a vector, and this vector here will be T equals sigma ns, will be nothing but the stress vector on this facet. Okay? And then if you take this quantity and if you make the scalar product by ls, what you will get will be the projection of tau on this direction here. Okay? When this projection here will be what I call 2s on the main screen here. Okay? And this 2s is called the resolved shear stress. Okay? And this will be the driving force for the more elementary plastic model. That means what I will assume for a single crystal like this, one on a lower scale, is that if I have a resolved shear stress on this plane in this direction, that will be larger than a critical value, and then I will have shear in this direction. Okay? And so now you can imagine that this criteria is very simple. It's a linear criteria. Since here I have just geometrical aspects, and I will have a criterion that will depend linearly on the stress. But you can imagine also that in my material I have a lot of slip systems. Okay, you have seen that, for instance, in this picture here, you can check that you have a lot of slip systems in the same grain. I have slip like that, and even in another direction here. Okay, so that means that on a given point, the material can flow in several directions. So the most simple plasticity criteria will be characterized by a series of planes in the stress space. Okay, we will see what are these planes now, and then having in hand this very simple criterion for a single crystal, we can apply it also to more complex material. We can apply it to directionally solidified material like that. That means some grains that share the same direction, O1 for instance, and that differ from each other just by a rotation around this axis. Or you can try to build also some elastic domain for polycrystal. So if you follow this link here, you will go to the website and you can play also and to build some yield surfaces like that. So this is a simple example of what you get for one grain. So you take just 1 cubic grain, okay, and you apply a tension and a shear on this grain. Okay? And this will be the shape of the yield surface. You can see that it's just linear, and you have a square like that with a 45-degree rotation with respect to the axis. That means if you apply a simple tension, you will find this value. If you apply a simple shear, you will have the same value in shear. Okay? Okay, but in the real world, it's not. Sometimes you have single crystal, but it's not common. And generally speaking, you have many grains. So if I consider now another grain, so this is what I get, the type of boundary I get if I take the same grain, but if I rotate this grain with respect to my loading axis. And now I'll preserve a linear form, you know, but the shape is different. So let's assume now that I have a material that is made of 2 grains, the initial one and the second one. In fact, I will reach the end of the elastic domain will be the red boundary here. That means, in that case, the grain in direction 2, 3, 4 will have the plasticity first. In this small area here, plasticity will be reached by the first grain first. And you can add grains like that with various rotation. And if you have 10 grains, for instance, you go from this red one to this green one. And if I take the same work with 100 grain, what I get is something like that. And it turns out to be an elliptic shape. And what is interesting now is that the shape is exactly the same that this ellipse here. And by the way, this ellipse, we will see later that it corresponds exactly to the so-called Tresca criterion. The Tresca criterion, we will define it as a criterion where you have you are limited by the maximum shear. Okay? And we have a local explanation, a metallurgical explanation of the Tresca criterion here. That means this is a criterion that will consider all the possible grains in space with all the direction, and that will assume that you always have a grain that is oriented to have easy slip. Okay? So I think that now we are ready for building our model and for going to the equation themselves. And we will start with a pressure-independent model. We'll see Tresca and von Mises models. And then we will have a brief look at the Hill model, which is a model for anisotropic material. So before considering this Tresca model, I will recall you briefly what are the Mohr circles. This is important to have that in mind when you consider this type of model. And in order to do that, I start with this stress tensor here, which is a stress tensor with just 3 eigenstresses. Okay, and I try to characterize not what happens generally speaking in 3 directions, but only in the sigma 1, sigma 2 plane. Okay, So, and what I would like to build, this is the extremity of the stress vector in a plane, which is nothing but Tn, Tt. Tn corresponds to the normal component of the stress vector, and Tt corresponds to the shear component of the stress vector. That means that I am in the somewhere in the material where I have an n direction here, like that, and the Tn Tt frame is something like that, Tn Tt. Okay? But if I consider another facet here, I will have a new normal that will be like that, and now my Tn will be like that, my Tt will be like that, and the game is to locate the extremity of the stress vector here, T, in this area here, and maybe in this area here. Okay, for this normal and for this normal. Okay, this is assume that this one is case A, this one is case B. So for case A, I will have a vector here. For case B, I will have a vector here. Okay, and the purpose is to know what is the area of this Tn plane that is used when I will rotate my my vector n in this in the real space. Okay, so to understand that, I have to build the component of T of vector T, and that I can do, but by considering first the stress vector. I can compute the stress vector by multiplying sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3 by a vector that characterize the orientation of the normal in the sigma 1, sigma 2 plane. Okay, so I will assume that theta is the angle between the direction sigma y and the current direction. Okay, that means in the real world, I will have something here that will be the normal n will be nothing but cosinus theta, sinus theta 0. Okay, so I can compute what happens in that case here, and I can check that the stress vector is sigma 1 cos theta, sigma 2 sin theta, and 0. Okay? So from that, I can derive the normal stress, and you will, so this is a T for a vector n. The normal stress Tn, the normal stress Tn, this is T, the vector n, with a scalar product by n. Okay? That means that you have to take this vector here, and you have to make the scalar product by cos theta sin theta 0. Okay, what will result will be this one, cos sigma cos theta cos square plus sigma 2 sin square. Okay, plus sigma 2 sin square theta. Okay, and then you have to compute the t and this t sub t. And T sub T is square, so you can apply that since you have your, on a given facet, you have your vector T, you have your Tn here, and Tt will be this one. That means in this triangle here, you can apply the Pythagorean theorem, and T and this T is T squared minus Tn squared. Once you have that in hand, so I don't make all the computation. So you will compute t squared t sub t like the square root of t squared minus Tn squared, and what you will get will be exactly this result. Okay, so now what if you consider these two expressions here? You can check that if I take Tn minus this sum here, I get sigma 1 minus sigma 2 over 2 cos 2 theta. And if I take the square of this thing plus the square of tt, I can eliminate now this theta. And I just get sigma 1 minus sigma 2 over 2 squared. So what does it mean? What is the equation of the extremity of my stress vector in the TN-TT plane? What is this? You can check that this is a circle. And the center of the circle is on the x-axis with a shift, which is a half sum sigma 1 plus sigma 2 over 2. And the radius of the circle is like that. Okay, so now we can move on the next slide. And this is a circle. I have just represented 1/2 of the circle. And the two extremities are these one, sigma 1, sigma 2. The center is sigma 1 plus sigma 2 over 2. And the radius is the difference, sigma 1 minus sigma 2 over 2. Okay? This is one circle. If instead of considering the plane x1, x2, sigma 1, sigma 2, I consider sigma 2, sigma 3, I will have this one. And for the last two, I will have this big circle. And the yellow area here, this is a place where the stress vector will be for any direction in space. Okay? So what is interesting now to check is that if I consider these three eigenstresses here, the maximum shear I can have in my material is obtained when I compute the half difference between the two extreme values. Okay, and it is obtained at this point here. And what I can demonstrate also is that this is what I have in the in the plane 1, 2. Okay, when I am here, my real direction is axis x1. Here I am in the axis x3, and then you can check that when I rotate by an angle 90 degrees in the real space, I will rotate by an angle 180 degrees in my more space here. That means that when I am at the maximum here, I have rotated by 90 degrees in the warp space, and in the real world, I have rotated by 45 degrees. So this is the reason why when you have your maximum shear, that is the difference, the half difference between the two extreme eigenstresses, and the direction of this shear is 45 degrees. It corresponds to the specimen we had. Remember, in dynamic compression, we had this facet at 45 degrees. This corresponds exactly to this criterion. So as a result now, if I want to have the more general expression of my criterion, the Tresca criterion will be something like the maximum on I and j of sigma y minus sigma g, the absolute value, minus sigma y is equal to 0. And this sigma y is nothing but the tensile stress, since in the case where you have a simple tension, you have sigma 2, sigma 3 that are equal to 0, and you just have one eigenstress, which is sigma 1, and in that case, the largest difference will be between sigma 1 and 0. It will be sigma 1 itself. So if I apply a tension on a pure tension of the specimen, what I will have here is just sigma y. So you can have a view to Tresca's page on Wikipedia. Tresca was a French mechanical engineer. So what you have to mention? What we have to mention is that he was a professor in Paris, and he was also one of the designers of the prototype meter bar. Okay, so at that time, people wanted to know exactly what is a meter. He was in this group, and also he was so famous that his name is now on the Eiffel Tower. You have something like 70 names of the Eiffel Tower of famous scientists. So Tresca is one of these person. So I have space on this screen here, and the space is for Mises, since Tresca and von Mises are the two more common criteria we will have to deal with in our study. So von Mises was an Austrian scientist, So his brother was also famous. His brother was a philosopher and an economist, maybe more famous than von Mises, I would say, in the society. So in fact, he wrote his own criterion in 1913. And so what does it mean? This von Mises criterion, we will study it now. To start our lecture, we have considered a criterion, which is Tresca criterion, that is written in terms of maximum eigenstresses. But if we want to deal with an isotropic material, that is the case for the moment, so we may also consider the fact that any function of stresses for an isotropic material can be written as a function of its invariant. So it's important in that case to introduce the three invariants of the stress tensor, and they are like that. So there are several definitions, but I would say the most common definition is the definition where you consider that the first invariant is a trace of the stress tensor, and the second invariant is a trace of the square of the tensor. Okay, that means that if you want to make the product of sigma by sigma, so you have to consider the matrices form. So you have to make a product of line by columns like that to obtain your result. And since we have two tensors and we have one dot on the middle, what we have seen that for the first lecture, what we will get is also a tensor. And the result of the tensor will be a big tensor with component will be Ig here, for instance, and they will be obtained by making the sum sigma Ik, sigma k j. Okay? When you write something like that, that means that you make a sum, since this subscript here is repeated. So you make a sum where k takes the value 1, 2, 3, and what you will obtain is a new tensor with component are Ig. Okay, that will be this is a square of sigma. And now, if you want to consider the trace of this tensor, what you have to consider is just that the two subscripts must be equal. Okay, that means you have to put G equal to I, and now what you get here is sigma like that, or since this is a symmetric tensor, this is the same to write sigma Ik, and now here you have, how many terms you have in this expression? You have 9 terms, since you have a sum on I and a sum on K. Okay? And this gives you, starting from these 9 terms here, you will get a scalar. And this scalar is nothing but the second invariant of the tensor. Okay? So if you restart the process, but you make a product sigma times sigma times sigma, and then you take the trace, you will get a sum like that with sigma I G, sigma J K, sigma Ki. Okay, you can see this thing is a tensor, since you have a sum on J, a sum on K, and a sum on I. Okay? So we will use this one, but in the first class of model we will build, so we will not use I1, since we have to deal with a class of materials that are not sensitive to the hydrostatic pressure. So instead of sigma, we will work with S. And in that case, the S, we have already seen that. You obtain S by taking sigma, and you subtract 1/3 of the trace to this initial tensor, and then you get the deviator. So obviously the trace of the deviator is 0 by construction, and then we will have to use these G2 and G3 to make our criteria in the case where the model does not depend on the hydrostatic pressure. So this will be a first possibility, And so now you can imagine that if this one is an invariant, maybe you will agree with me if I tell that this expression here is also invariant. This is the same. You take the square root of that and you change the scalar that is before here. Okay? So, but it will be more interesting to consider this one, since so after some manipulation and a little bit of algebra, what you can demonstrate is that this expression, which is equal to this expression, is also exactly the absolute value of sigma if you have a pure tension. That means if I consider, so I will, maybe we have to show that briefly. If I consider a tensor like this one, which is a pure tension state, okay? So what is the deviator corresponding to this tensor in the same frame? So I have to take the trace, which is sigma. 1/3 of the trace is sigma over 3. And then I have to subtract sigma over 3 to get the deviator. That means I have 2/3 of sigma minus sigma over 3 minus sigma over 3. Okay? And full of 0. Now what I have to consider is SIG. Okay? So this is what I want to compute here. Okay? This SIG is nothing but S11. So I have to make the double sum, okay, on ING. It's SY1 square plus S22 square plus S33 square plus, so I have N12 square plus S21 square that are equal to 2 S12 square plus 2 S23 square plus 2 S31 square. Okay, so this is a full development of my sum. Okay, so what I want to compute is 3/2. So I put 3/2 factor here, and then I will check what happens with my special expression here. In this expression, you can see that all the shear are equal to 0. Okay, and so I will have 3/2. I have sigma square. And then the first term is 4/9. The second one is 1/9. The third one is 1/9. Okay? That means that I have 3/2 sigma square, and this is 6/9. Okay, that means that this one is just 1. Okay, so now if I take the square root of that, I will have the square root of that, and I will have the absolute value of sigma. Okay? You agree with that? So that means that this term here is nothing but the absolute value of sigma. Okay, so I would like to convince you also that this term is also this sum here. So we have to restart with something which is a little more complex, but let's do it. So I start with a vector, a tensor now sigma 2, sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3. And I have to compute the deviator. Okay, so let's start with the trace. The trace is sigma 1 plus sigma 2 plus sigma 3 over 3. And I have to subtract the trace to this tensor here. Okay, on the diagonal term. That means I will get something which is a little long, but I will have 2 sigma 1 minus sigma 2 minus sigma 3 over 3. 2 sigma 2 minus sigma 1 minus sigma 3 over 3. 2 sigma 3 minus sigma 1 minus sigma 2 over 3. And full of 0. Okay. If I want to compute SIG, that will be nothing, so I put 3/3 here. I will have to compute 2 sigma 1 minus sigma 2 minus sigma 3 over 3 square plus 2 sigma 2 minus sigma 1 minus sigma 3 over 3 square plus the last one. Okay? And then when you develop these ones, you have 3/3 here. And then you can see that you have a term in sigma 1 square that will be here 4 over 9. Okay? And then you will have here plus 1 over 9, etc. You will have sigma 2 square with the same term. You will have sigma 3 square the same. And then you will have minus the product here, sigma 1, sigma 2. You will have again 4 over 9 minus, also sorry, I had plus 2 over 9, etc. So doing that, you will have an expression. I don't make all the computation in detail. So you will have terms in sigma 1 square, sigma 2 square, sigma 3 square, and then sigma 1, 2, sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 2, sigma 3, sigma 3, sigma 1. And then you can check that this expression is the same if you take this one and if you take this expression here. Okay, so you will have several expressions depending on the way you will express your model. So this will be the difference between the eigenstresses, and this will be just a component of the deviator. Now we have to, I would like to discuss the geometrical justification for the yield, for the Tresca yield criterion. So what is this G that we have introduced here? What is this G? So in fact, the easiest thing to consider is that this G will define, assume that G equal constant. If you consider G equal constant, that means that you will have nothing but 3/3 of S11 square plus S22 square plus S33 square plus 2 S12 square plus 2 S23 square plus 2 S31 square equal a constant. That will define a sphere. In fact, this is a sphere, so von Mises stress. We will consider that this thing here is von Mises stress. Will delimitate something by a sphere in a 6-dimension space. Okay, so this is the first geometrical justification of the model. Another justification is that this G here is nothing but the octahedral stress. The octahedral stress, this is what you obtain if you consider a very specific facet. That means if you are in the eigenstress space like that, you have one specific direction, which is the direction 1 over square root of 3, 1 square root of 3, 1 over square root of 3. Okay? This is, if you change this, the tensor in this direction, that means that you will add something like sigma 0, a tensor like sigma 0, sigma 0, sigma 0, then you will have a displacement in this space parallel to this direction here. That means that you will change your tensor just by a spherical part. Okay? And that means that you will have the same deviator. Okay? So this is the reason why this facet here is a very interesting one. So, and if I compute what happens, what is the stress vector in that case? The stress vector is, I have to compute like that. So this will be sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3 times 1 over square root of 3. Okay? The normal stress on this facet, on the facet 1, 1, 1 like that, the normal stress will be this stress vector with a scalar product by the normal. that will be just 1/3 of sigma 1 plus sigma 2 plus sigma 3. Okay? And then I can compute, if I compute t, this will be the square root of t squared minus tn squared. Okay? And that will be the square root of, so t squared here is 1/3 of sigma 1 squared plus sigma 2 squared plus sigma 3 squared. Okay, I take each component. And Tn here is, I have to take 1/9 sigma 1 plus sigma 2 plus sigma 3 squared. Okay? When you compute this expression here, what you will get is just square root of 2 divided by 3 times just g. Okay? So that means that if you are in this facet, I can also plot, so I can make a plot like this one. Consider the facet with this normal, and that what I will check that if I take a normal here, a vector here, this is the stress vector here, with a 1, 1, 1 direction here, the limit here of the shear in this facet will be defined by the von Mises, by this G. Okay, will be proportional to G. Oops. And I can have another view of the same result here, assuming now that I have this 1, 1, 1 direction, which is perpendicular to the paper here. I will plot this sigma 1 and this sigma 3, 2, and sigma 3 will appear as 3 directions with 120 degrees between them. And the limit of my of the shear in this plane, which is so-called the p-plane. The p-plane has a direction, the normal direction 1/3, 1 over square root of 3, 1 square root of 3. The limit will be given like that. This is G that will define the maximum shear in this plane. Okay, and so now we have to introduce directly the von Mises criterion. The von Mises criterion that B will have a limit of G to a given value that will be just sigma y. So why do you have such an expression? That means this is due to the fact that here this G is just the absolute value of sigma. So for pure tension, so we have just the absolute value of sigma minus sigma y, which is equal to 0. Okay. So in fact, this criterion is called von Mises criterion, but you can go again on Wikipedia here, and you will see that it was not elaborated by von Mises first. It was elaborated by Maxwell previously, and it was also published in Polish by another researcher whose name is Hubert. So that means that sometimes people call this criterion by Maxwell, von Mises, Hubert, and something. But generally speaking, it's now von Mises. And so this is a picture of the criterion in this sigma 1, sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3 space. And so what is here is the gathering plane or the p-plane, as I presented here just on the previous slide here. And since this is a famous direction 1, 1, 1, corresponding to a translation where you add sigma 0 to all of your components on the diagonal, when you add a sigma 0 like that, so you will have no variation of the sigma criterion, of the von Mises criterion. That means since it is insensitive to the hydrostatic pressure, so the von Mises criterion can be represented by a cylinder in this domain. Okay? So what you can see also is that when you will have just two non-zero stresses, assume that sigma 3 is equal to 0, what will be the limit of the von Mises criterion in a sigma 1, sigma 2 plane, in a state of biaxial stress state. You can imagine that here. If sigma 3 is equal to 0, the shape of the criterion will be just the intersection between this cylinder here and the sigma 1, sigma 2 plane. And what will be the shape? An intersection between a cylinder with a circular section and a plane with a certain angle like that. And what you will get here will be an elliptic shape. So we will see that later. Okay? This is for that. And here you have also the representation of the Tresca criterion. And the Tresca criterion, so we have seen that this Tresca is linear since we have just shear. And the shear finally is defined with respect to stresses. It is defined by a linear combination. So this is the reason why here you have an hexagonal shape. Okay? And this Tresca criterion will meet von Mises for tension, for instance. You can decide to have the same criteria that give the same result for pure tension. Okay, this is a view in the P plane now, and I have this sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3 axis. So this corresponds to pure tension here. Just sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3 are equal to 0. This is pure tension in sigma 2. This is pure tension in sigma 3. Okay? This is pure compression here. Just sigma 2 and no one else. Pure compression, pure compression. And this point here corresponds to shear. That means we have seen that already. In that point here, you have plus sigma and minus sigma on sigma 2, and you have nothing, since this is vertical like that, you have nothing on sigma 3. Okay, so this is pure shear. Okay? And so this is the solution. And when you will build your Tresca criterion, it's not done here, sorry, you will have a Tresca that will meet von Mises here, and that will differ in shear, since here you draw a straight line, and you will have a difference between Tresca and von Mises. Okay, so we will study that later in detail. Maybe I can just give you a series of results we will have. We will study this criterion in the shear, axial stress, shear stress plane, and also in the biaxial, for biaxial state of stresses. Okay. So so maybe we will see that later, and we can have a look at this one briefly. For instance, when we have this starting from this general expression here, what we have on the bottom here for von Mises, what happens if I consider that just two components are equal to different from 0? If I assume that sigma 3 is 0 here, I will just consider sigma 1 and sigma 2, and the expression for with just sigma 1, sigma 2, and 0 von Mises will be nothing but F sigma, which is equal to, so you have here 1/2 of sigma 1 minus sigma 2 square, plus sigma 2 square, plus sigma 3 square, finally. Okay? Minus sigma y. And that means that, plus sigma 2 square, plus sigma 1 square. Okay? The last one, just sigma 1 is saved. And that means that it can be written like I have 2 times sigma 1 square, that means at the end I will have just sigma 1. 2 times sigma 2 square, so plus sigma 2 square. And 2 times the double product, that means at the end, since I divide by 2, minus sigma 1, sigma 2. I have a square root here. Minus sigma y equals 0. Okay, that means that the expression is nothing but sigma y, sigma 1 square plus sigma 2 square minus sigma 1, sigma 2 equal sigma y square. So what is this? What is this curve here? If I try to plot this curve, you can check that if I put sigma 2 equal to 0, I will find two intersections. Sigma 1, sigma 2. That will be sigma y equal sigma 1 equal plus sigma y or minus sigma y. I will find also if sigma 1 is 0, I will find minus sigma y and plus sigma y. So finally, what is the shape of the curve? It's not a circle? No, it's not a circle. Since now assume that let's consider sigma 1 equals sigma 2, for instance. That means what happens in this direction here? The first basic trace. If you replace by sigma 1, sigma 2, you have sigma 1 square plus sigma 1 square minus sigma 1 square. Okay, that means that on this line here, you find that the curve goes on sigma y, sigma y, sigma y. Okay, it's here. And in fact, what you can check is that this curve is an ellipse. Okay, this is an ellipse like that. Okay, and this ellipse, this is nothing but exactly the intersection of this cylinder with a plane. So now, if I can put here sigma 3, which is perpendicular to this to the sheet of paper here, sigma 3, okay, and the cylinder is exactly in this direction here. Okay, so you have this cylinder. I can show you here. I have this sigma 3 here, and the cylinder is like that. Okay, it's inclined, and then you have, this is the reason why you have this intersection. Okay. So what about Tresca criterion now? So for Tresca criterion, what you have to consider when you have this sigma 1, sigma 2, and 0. So you have to consider this plane again here. Sigma 1, sigma 2.
Excuse me, who did that?
Oops. Sorry. And then you have to consider what is the order of your various eigenstresses. So depending on the region of the plane. So I have sigma 3, which is equal to 0. In this area here, I have 0 that is smaller than sigma 1, smaller than sigma 2. Okay, so sigma 2, since this line corresponds to sigma 1 equals sigma 2. Okay, so here sigma 2 is bigger than sigma 1. So here I have, in this area here, I have 0 smaller than sigma 2, smaller than sigma 1. Agree? And this 0 is sigma 3 equal, sigma 3 equals 0. Okay? Since my sigma 1 and sigma 2 are always positive in this place. Okay? They are negative in the other one. So here, if I consider this thing here, for this place here, in all the case, I have sigma 2 now is sigma 2 is negative here, which is then smaller than sigma 3, which is equal to 0, and smaller than sigma 1. Okay? So what are the expressions? The expression of Tresca is the maximum of sigma I minus sigma j minus sigma y equals 0. maximum Ig. Because I must take the extrema. Okay? So here, the two extrema, they are 0 and sigma 2. So the maximum, I will achieve the maximum shear in the plane 2, 3. And the expression of the Tresca criterion will be exactly F sigma equal sigma 2 minus sigma y equal 0. Here, what will the extremum will be sigma 1 and sigma 3. It's another plane. And F sigma will be sigma 1 minus sigma y equals 0. Sigma 2 doesn't play any role in that case. But here, I still have another expression here, and the maximum shear is achieved in the 1, 2 plane. And 1 is the biggest stress, so F sigma has another expression, sigma 1 minus sigma 2 minus sigma y equals 0. Okay, so I have a piecewise function. Okay? And in that case, what does it mean? Sigma 2 minus equals sigma y. Easy to plot. I just have this sigma y, and I plot an horizontal line at sigma y. This one, easy to plot also, it's sigma 1 equal constant, equal to sigma y. And this one is not too difficult. This one can be written sigma 2 equal sigma 1 minus sigma y. That means this is a segment that goes like that, and this point is minus sigma y. And I will have also symmetries. That means that I can have the same thing here, minus sigma y, and I will complete the criterion like that. Okay, so this is Tresca criterion. And you can compare it with the von Mises. The von Mises is exactly this one. Okay? For pure tension, you will have the same result. For biaxial tension, you will have the same result too. And for shear corresponds to sigma 2 equal minus sigma 1. That is shear. And you are here. And you will have a difference between the two criteria. Okay? So these are the two basic criteria you can write. Von Mises here, Tresca here. But doing that, I have considered the deviator. I have forgotten the hydrostatic part of my stresses. But I have also defined the third invariant. What about the third invariant? And in fact, you have a series of criteria that are written with the third invariant. In order to check what can be the result, we must have a look at this diagram here. So on this diagram, it's again in the eigenstress space. What in blue, what you have in blue is just the plane. Sigma 1, sigma 3 plane, sigma 1, sigma 2, and sigma 2, sigma 3 plane. Okay? And what is interesting to check is that if you want to have I1 equal constant, that will define a plane that is proportional to this 1, 1, 1 axis. We have seen that previously. If we want to have a G2 constant, so we will have a line in parallel to this 1, 1, 1 direction. And this J3 will introduce some more complex events, since G3 is something that may be equal to 0 for non-zero stress state. So G3, in pure shear, for instance, G3 will be equal to 0. Okay? That means that you will have a specific shape of the equipotential surface for G3. Okay? And I will give you some example now. So one thing to know is that this G3 can play a role to define so-called load angle. And once you have in hand this load angle, you can also define the expression of the Tresca criterion with respect. Sorry, it's a arc cosinus here. It's not. You have to do it. This Tresca criterion can be represented by combination of the second and the third invariant. Okay, but it's not what I would like to show you. What I would like to show you is another criterion which is called the Drucker criterion. That is nothing but Tresca criterion. Assume that I take K0 equals 0 here, this material constant, and just recover von Mises criterion. Okay? But if I have this thing here, I will modify von Mises by this G3 term. And what will be the result? So before looking at the result, this is the equipotential of G2 and G3 in the axial plane, axial shear plane. Okay, since this G3 is equal to 0 in pure shear, so the equipotential will go like that and will go to infinity in this direction. Because that means if you make a combination of these two equipotentials, you may have funny shapes maybe. Okay, and one thing you get is now the combination with K0 equal to 0. You just have von Mises. And once you increase your K0 here, you will have a shift of the surface to the compression. So that means this is a solution to have a difference of behavior in tension and compression. And that is observed, for instance, for some cast alloys. You may have results like that. So this is a deformation you have in pure shear. Now, if you look at the result in a biaxial state of stress, so now what we find here, this is an elliptic shape. This is for von Mises, and the correction will be done with such a Finney shape here, with some things like you go to infinity here for a pure shear. You have -1. The slope is -1 here. And you go to infinity also for a slope of 1/2 and 2. Okay? And the result will be, so like that, this is the first ellipse we have obtained for von Mises just a moment ago. And then it is a result with K equal 0.1, 0.5, 2, this funny shape here. And you have this type of behavior for shape memory material, for instance. You have this type of result. And after that, what you have to consider is that it's dangerous to take too big values. Then you will obtain funny shape like this one, and the shape here is no longer convex. We will see later that it's not appropriate for yield surfaces. A yield surface must remain convex, and this one is, for instance, is totally forbidden. Okay, just one word about. One word about the isotropic criteria we can write. So it's easy to define, in fact. So sometimes you have an isotropic material. That means, for instance, you have a matrix, but inside this matrix you have fibers or composites. Okay, that means in the direction of the fiber, the material will be very strong, and the other direction it will be weaker. Okay. So what you have to introduce in that case, instead of considering an invariant like sigma ig for von Mises, so you will introduce a correction of this product here by a force under tensor. What does it mean? That means that in each direction of your sphere in the 6-dimensional space, you will have a different threshold. Okay, that means that in the direction of the fibers, the threshold will come later. Okay. And this will be represented by this force under tensor. And again, so this is the expression in terms of product sigma ig. You have also another expression which is more classical that introduce 6 terms like this one, these 6 terms here, and again they correspond to a correction in each direction. Please note that they are not independent, since you must also check that your material is not doesn't introduce any volume change. And this relation will introduce a connection between these terms. Okay, so time is short, but before finishing today, I will give you a view concerning the pressure-dependent criteria. And so for this pressure-dependent criteria, we again have two names, and these names are Mohr and Coulomb. So Coulomb is the first one who worked on electricity, electricity and magnetism, but he did also some works in mechanics, especially on friction problem and the wire torsion. So a long time ago. So its mechanics literature goes back to 1784. And since he worked on friction, and this model here, this Mohr-Coulomb model deals with friction problems. So this Otto Mohr, who has formulated this criterion, has also used the name of Coulomb for the model. So what is the shape of this model? The shape is like this one. So we are again in the sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3 model, but previously for the von Mises and for the Tresca models, we had cylinders. Cylinder with an axis parallel to 1, 1, 1. Okay? The point now is that since you have a criterion which is sensitive to the hydrostatic pressure, that means that if you make a translation along 1, 1, 1, you will have a variation of your criterion. Okay? And we have seen also, it's intuitive that if you apply a compression, the material will be stronger. That means that instead of having this cylinder along 1, 1, 1, you will have a cone, and this cone will be open along in the direction of the pressure of the compression, and it will close in the direction of tension. So on the other hand, if you apply a tension on your material, it will break for a zero force. You can shear the material. Okay, so that means that this corresponds to this point, which is this is a 1, 1, 1 direction here, and you will increase the resistance when you go in the direction of triaxial compression. Okay. So so I don't go into detail on these points. We will see that later. Just I would like to show also another cone, and this other cone is this one. Previously we had something with a corner, with edges and corner. And what we can check is that this Mohr-Coulomb criterion is the extension to pressure-dependent material of the Tresca model. So we will look we'll have expression like this one when we go to the definition with equation. And we have also this model, which is Drucker-Prager, and this model is an extension of Tresca, of von Mises model. Okay? We'll have a combination now of G, which comes from the von Mises, and E1, which is the hydrostatic pressure. So we will study that in the next lecture. Just before finishing, I would like to mention again that all these things are available in this book, and maybe you can ask me if you want to have more information concerning this book. Okay, thank you for your attention, and see you next week.